Hello there. This is a Android tutorial on how to create a Android widget that will manually or periodically retrieve data from using a REST API. So let's begin by first showing you what we want to achieve. So we want to achieve a functionality similar to this one. So we're retrieving some basic data from an API, and as you can see, this is something that happened on today, May 25th. And if we go here and add a widget, we can see that that same data is displayed here. If we click on refresh, it's going to load a new data using that REST API. And if we click again, as you can see in 1738, Pennsylvania, Maryland, and it's the same here in this application. So what we're going to do is create this little widget. I'm not going to style it, UI, I'm just going to show you how to make it reload, refresh data manually, periodically, and yeah, even if we, for instance, refresh data here, okay, Republic of Formosa, as you can see, it's refreshed here. So I'm going to close this Android emulator. So the first thing I'm going to do is describe a little bit the contents of this project. You can find the Git repository down in the description, and I'm just going to show you just a little bit what is contained in here. So let's first look at the main activity. The main activity uses binding to access UI data. Let's see the layout. Okay, the layout is pretty much very simple. It has only this text view and this button here. These are the IDs. Moving on. If we look at here, it's pretty much simple. Inflating the binding variable using the root as content view. We can see that the refresh button has a click listener set here. That click listener pretty much retrieves data, retrieves that data using here inside the data package. We get the remote. We use retrofit. There is here inside build Gradle the dependency added, so you can look at it. So pretty much we have here a numbers API service. We have this little link. So if we would to paste this inside our browser, it will give us this data. So it's pretty much a JSON which has a text, which is a string, a year, which is an int, a number, which is an int, a found, which is a boolean, a type, which is a string. The pretty much the retrofit library. This is how it functions. You have the month, the day of the month, and this is pretty much the rest of that API. This is the base URL. We have here something, now usually you would use dependency injection, but we have here a little object that creates a retrofit instance. We have a base URL, and here we access the numbers API service, which we're going to use to retrieve the data. One thing, to store the data, you should maybe use a database, but to make this tutorial as easy as possible and to concentrate just on the widget, I've saved data in the shared preference, and this thing only has two functions: to save data in that file and to retrieve data from that file. So pretty much it's very simple. Our refresh button click, which in a coroutine uses the retrofit service, actually the getNumber API service, and calls the getDate fact suspend. So this function, we have to supply the number of the month and the day of the month, and then this will, in a delay, fetch the data, and if the data is not null, we're going to use the Share Preference Manager to save the data and to render the fact on our UI screen. So pretty much the thing you're going to clone and the code you're going to get, okay, it's going to be run on the device. So the pretty much the implementation. So this app, the implementation is of this current app on the GitHub is just this main activity screen. Now the new thing we're going to do is add a widget. So to add a widget, we're going to create here a new package called widget. And we're going to create a widget from scratch. So we're going to call it app widget. Okay, and the app widget will actually inherit from something called an app widget provider. So the app widget provider, if we go inside and look at it, is nothing else but a broadcast receiver. And if we know a little bit better from Android, a broadcast receiver, a service, and an activity all have to be defined in the manifest file. So this is the activity, and we have to define here that receiver. So what we're going to do is define the receiver, just add this new file that we've created, and because of Android 12, we're going to say exported false, sorry. So intent filter is a way that our widget is going to be opened, and we have to add a flag, an action. That action is app widget update, and I don't think the autocomplete will work at this point. And we also have to add a metadata, which will define how the widget looks and how the widget behaves. So what is it that we're what metadata are we giving? A Android app widget provider, and the source, the resource. Okay, this is something that we're going to create, an XML app widget info. So this is the file that's going to describe our widget and describe its behavior. Okay, we've created this part. Now that we created this part, let's go to the widget. The widget has actually two, but let's focus for now just on that one very important method. It's called onUpdate. Okay, so each time the widget is updated, this method will be called. But before we continue with the code for the widget, we have to okay, in the Android manifest file, if we look here, this is red. We have to add this XML file. So this is the file that will, in a way, describe how our widget looks, how it behaves. So let's delete all of this. The tag we're going to use is app widget provider. Let's close it. Some of the attributes we're going to use is pretty much this import, which is, I think, in most of the layout files present. For instance, I think, yeah, it's present here. Then we're going to define the description of the widget. Now, this is something you're just going to add a string inside here. Okay. So I'm going to use this description, for instance. One more thing we're going to use is the initial layout. Now, I think this is something, yeah, the initial layout is something that tells how the widget will look, where the layout file will be located. Now, this is also going to be red because we haven't implemented it. We're going to create the file. Okay, minimal width. I'm going to set it to 150 dp. Minimal height, 110 dp. Now, these values are going to have to research on your own somewhere on the Android developer sites to see how much one, like these blocks, is big in density pixels. Now, the resize mode, we're going to say horizontal or vertical, so we can resize it in both sides. Update, period, milliseconds. Now, if I'm not mistaken, that's 60 times 60 times 1000. So we're going to set it to 1 hour. Widget category. We're going to just put it on the home screen. Now, the next red file that we're going to fix is this missing layout file. We're going to copy this, go in here, and create a layout file called app widget. And one important thing to note is that a widget is something that was created a long time ago. It wasn't really updated all that much by Android. And as I know it, the only two, you can like only use linear layout and relative layout to define a widget. So we're going to use a linear layout, and layout is going to be very simple. It's going to be something like in the main screen. We're going to have a text view. I'm going to say here, use this string. Yeah, you're gonna have to say here orientation vertical. I'm going to use here the ID. And I'm going to put a button. We're going to say, okay, the text is going to take most of the space. We're going to give it some margin. We're going to give it a text. And we're going to give it an ID. And yeah, it's not anymore wrap content. It's more or better if we use 0dp. And one more thing I'm going to use is I'm going to make this text bigger so you can see it. Okay, now this is the initial widget layout. Now, with this done, what we are going to do is now, if we look at here, the app widget info is now updated. Now, where is the project? Okay, the project. We're going to go back inside widget, app widget. Okay, we're inside the app widget. So this is where all of the functionality has to be implemented. So how the widget functions is a little bit different from how you would write a code usually in a main activity. In a main activity, as you saw, we can say some kind of a text to set text and set text to some kind of a value. It's a little bit different here in the widget, not so much because of the text, but how the button press works. So How you should make it work is we first need to retrieve the data. We created this shared preferences manager, but most likely you're going to use some kind of a either repository or most likely a repository and retrieve data from some kind of a database. We're going to retrieve data from a database. And one more thing I'm going to use is I'm going to say context return app widget manager return, because I don't really want to be here if any of these is null. Okay, we've retrieved the data. After we retrieve the data, we have to render widget. Now I'm going to implement here a render widget, but I'm going to have to give it some parameters. It's going to have to use pretty much all of these, but without the question, and it's going to use data which is nullable. So the way you update a widget is you have to say you have to create something called a remote view. A remote view which takes two parameters. First is the package name. Okay. The second one is the layout of the widget. And I think I called it app widget, but either way I have to import this R. And it's not a remote view. I'm sorry, it's remote views. So plural. And after we've created a remote view, we have to see if the data is not null. We have to set it, and the way we set it is we can't like, if we look at this thing, this is the layout file. This is the ID of the text view. You can't like just say find view by ID or binding dot this and set the text. You have to say remote view set text view text, and then you have to give it the ID of the text view, and then you have to give the data or the string you want to set the text view. This is a little bit weird, but it is how it is. And one more thing you have to call, because when you do this, it's not going to refresh the widget. It will refresh the widget when you say this. Update app widget, and you have to give it the IDs and the manager. Oops. Oops. I'm sorry, you have to give it the remote view that it has to update to. So this thing. Now I'm going to just pass all of the stuff, and now the problem before I start this thing, the button will not work. The button will not work. If we go to main activity, it will not set the data to the value it should when we press the load button here in the main activity. Why? Because when you click in the main activity get the data, it will retrieve the data, but it won't explicitly refresh the widget. The widget will refresh, the widget will refresh once an hour. So, but you can force it to manually refresh the widget. Let's go into this util file. So this is a file where I keep like all the utility stuff. And we're just going to create here a method that will allow us to update the widget. Fun request widget update. Context load. Okay. Okay, we're just gonna give the context. And the way we're going to do here is we need some kind of an intent. Widget update intent. And we're going to say app context send broadcast intent. So we need an intent, but we need to create that intent. Okay. So we have to declare a app widget class.java. So this is something. So this is just how we create the intent to call the widget update. This is just a way. Okay, here this is just a way to get the widget IDs. So a widget ID is ID of that widget. You can put like on multiple home screens more widgets, or on one home screen more of the same widgets, and we need to like call or refresh all of these widgets. So now is the intent creation, and this is pretty much simple. App widget manager, and it's going to use the action app widget update, and the second one is null, the third one is the context, and the last one is what widget. One more thing, remember this, it's the same action as here in the manifest file. So I don't want to like we're gonna give it yeah, you have to give it like put extra, and we have to give it app widget manager extra app widget ID S, so plural. We have to give them what IDs to update. So I want to update everything, and so this extra is from the app widget manager class, which is implemented in Android, and we're going to return the intent. So this is how, okay, yeah, this could be private. So this is just how we can request the widget update manually. So we're gonna add this here. Oops, util, and it needs a a base context. So if we now run the application, okay, if we now run the application, you can see if we click refresh, we have here an information about the rebels of Lower Canada. Oops, I never added it. So let's see if the widget is actually available. It is actually available. Okay, and it says May 25th is the day in blah blah rebels of Lower Canada. If we go back inside here and click refresh, you can see that it refreshed. There is a reason why it's transparent, because we didn't add any background, unfortunately. The way we add background is just here. what color to use. I'm just gonna use like a color like hard-coded, if it's not a problem. Okay. Now the next thing we have to implement, okay, I'm going to delete this, we have to implement is the button press on the widget. So the button press on the widget. So how to handle button presses on the widget. So we're again in the app widget class. Now the thing is, here we are in the render widget. We can't just say like remote view set on click listener and like do something in here and expect that it'll do something. The way we handle the click listener is we need to set on click pending intent. And okay, which button? Refresh button. So this thing here. And what will it do? What will it do? It's going to use a pending intent. Now, a pending intent is pretty much I'm going to force a widget update. So the button press works that it forces you, it just enters this code again here. Now, how you can make it so it implements a manual update functionality is you have to, I'm going to create here a, so we have to first get that broadcast receiver. I'm sorry, the pending intent. So how we're going to create a pending intent? Request widget update pending in, and it's going to use context, and yeah, it's going to use something called actually, I'm going to tell you more about this later. Return pending intent. So widget. So we already created how to create an intent. The implementation's here. The next thing we're going to use is just return the already created pending intent. We're going to say get broadcast. It's going to use the context. I usually put here system current time millis to int. I'm gonna give it the intent, and this is something. These are two flags to update the current, and this is something that you have to add since Android 12. So we're going to give it this. And what's going to use here? I think it's the context. Now, what it'll do here, if we look at this code, it will just create a pending intent based on this intent, which will just call, okay, when you click on the button, it'll just call this code here. And it's just going to call this code here. Now, the problem with the refresh is if you click on refresh and it just does all of this code, it'll just retrieve the old data and render it again. Now, what we have to do is retrieve the new data from the internet. Now, to retrieve the data, we're going to have to do so what we're going to have to do is do this. Pretty much the same thing that we did here in the main activity. Pretty much a retrofit service, get number, blah, blah, blah. So we have to call this here. And if this is not null, so if it's not null, we're going to save the data. Okay? And after the data is saved, we load the data, render the widget. Now, first of all, we have this little problem here. should only be called from a coroutine. Now the only coroutine scope you can use here technically is this global scope. So let's put all of this here. And the rendering of the widget. I'm gonna do this on the main thread. Okay. Now, this is going to retrieve the data, save the data, and after the data is saved, it's going to load the data again, and then render the widget. Now, the problem here is with Android 12. The problem with Android 12 is at some point of time, this is going to be called in the background. And if you try to access this data in the background, you're going to have a problem. So what you have to do is somehow recognize when a manual button press is done, and recognize when it's done periodically. Now, this is a method that's going to be called just a little bit before the onUpdate is called. So just a little bit before the onUpdate is called. A good thing is here is that we have this intent, and we can extract some data from the intent. Like data, are we going to load it from the web? So I'm going to create here load from web. And I'm going to create here a companion object. And I'm going to say here, I'm going to call it maybe extra load from web. Okay, extra load from web. And we're going to go here, intent, get extras. Sorry, this has to go down here. I'm sorry. Load from web is equal to intent, get boolean extra. And if it's not, say false. And if the intent is null, then again, default it to false. And after this is done, the onReceive here will be called. And then the update is going to be called. And then after that, you're going to do this. Then you're going to, okay, pretty much, if it's a manual, if you should load from the web, load it from the web, save it to the file, to the database, whatever, and then load it, and then render the widget, okay? And that will help with the manual. But one thing we have to do is pass the extra to the, so we have to pass it here. And then we're going to have to pass it here. And then we're going to have to so this is our widget. And now it's passed to the intent. I'm going to pass it here. And this thing is request the widget update. I'm going to add here. Now, first we're going to have a little bit bugs. Here we're going to say false because we don't want here to load it from the web. So load from web is only manual. Here is the manual loading, so we're going to add true here. Now let's start the app. So if we click, okay, if we click here, we got something Holy Roman Emperor. Holy Roman Emperor. If we click here, As you can see, it's okay, 1833. So as you can see, the information is synced here and in the widget. Okay, now to the part how to update this periodically. So to update a widget periodically, you have to use something called a worker. Here I'm going to paste inside the dependency the worker dependency. So we're just going to go here. And we're going to sync. So a worker is something designed by Android, something that is very optimized to retrieve data in the background. Now what we're going to do is here in the widget, we're going to create a class. The class is going to be called a widget update worker. That widget update worker is going to inherit from the coroutine worker, which takes in two parameters. A context, and we're going to add it here. So now that we added this, we can see that this is red. It needs to implement one member, do work. So if we, you could use a worker, but I've used a coroutine worker because this function is suspended, and we need suspend to, like, in periods of time, go to the internet, retrieve the data, and save the data, and request the widget update. So the first thing we're going to do, the first thing I'm going to do here is, log that it's actually happening. Okay, first step is to retrieve data. Oh, it's not here, it's get month, util, get day of the month. And if the data is not null, we're going to save it into the database or into the... Now, one thing I'm going to do is just so we're just going to okay, this is a fact. We're just going to save the data. After we save the data, we're just going to request widget update. We're going to give it a context, and because we've already loaded from the web, when we go inside the widget, we don't want to load from web, because if we do load from web, we're just going to get some kind of a Android exception from Android 12. So important to put here false. And yeah, because this is a worker, we have to return result success. And that is all that we have to do here. There's one more thing. This worker has to be, I think this one wants to, is it that? Yes, this worker has to be enqueued, registered, or something like that. The best way to start this periodic worker is in a class that inherits the application. So we're going to create it here. It has a onCreate, and this one will be this function will be started each time you start your app. Now the method I'm going to call here is just one method that will enqueue a periodic worker. So what we're going to do here is first add some constraints. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to go back to this one. So a constraint is something that get update request periodic. I'm just going to import this. This is our widget update worker. This is we're gonna here add an interval. So the second parameter is a time unit, and I'm gonna say minutes. I'm gonna say it's going to update every 15 minutes. I don't know why these constraints didn't work. Okay, this one. It seems it imported the wrong library. So this is a constraint which will just say, okay, we need to be connected to the internet in order for this periodic worker to be started. And let's just enqueue this periodic worker. So this is the name of the unique periodic worker. So existing periodic worker policy is when we again enter this method and again try to enqueue it, it's going to keep the old one. Okay. Widget update request. Now let's see what the error is. Oh, I didn't call build. Okay. Or whatever. And we're just going to call it here in the onCreate. And now if we run it, so pretty much this worker will be enqueued here. And each time you can even have the application so turned off. The worker will be every 15 minutes if you are connected to the internet. This method will be executed. It will go to the internet, retrieve the data, save the data to the preference manager, and request the widget update. Now, request the widget update is going to force this method to be first called, then this method to be called. And inside this method, because this one is false, it'll skip this. It'll load the data, which has been saved a few seconds ago. and we're going to render the widget. Okay, so the reason why this here, the reason why the data is not loaded here is some Android 12 restrictions. As you can see, a few minutes later, it periodically, even though the device was like powered off, it did the work and retrieved the data from the internet. And one really important thing that I forgot, in the manifest file, you have to add this statement here. Android name base app. So this base app has to be defined here in the manifest file. Okay, that's it with the tutorial. Thank you for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel. Bye.